Okay, so last presentation before the Leon and Jerry show. Thank you for sticking around. Let's talk a little bit about blockchain.
We're not really the users, we're not really the customers, we're the product. But blockchain says it's another way, it's another way.
Blockchain, it's still an experimenting process.
In Africa, now we think about money in a very different way.
In this refugee camp, in this supermarket, all the transactions are authorized and recorded on a blockchain network.
I believe in the power of blockchain.
Open source technology like blockchain is exactly what hackers had envisioned from the beginning.
Are you a hacker?
Yeah, I describe myself as a hacker.
Blockchain is going to scare the shit out of some very powerful people.
Blockchain is just a scam.
A lot of this stuff is going to go away.
It doesn't serve any useful function.
A fraud.
What we're trying to stop is simple. We're trying to stop the abuse of power.
So, my name is Adam Lesh. I'm from Singular DTV. Oh, hang on a second. We rebranded. Actually, I'm from a company called Breaker now. And we call ourselves a blockchain entertainment studio. We are working on a platform where independent artists can monetize their content by publishing it onto a portal, much like an iTunes or an Amazon Prime Video, but use blockchain as their rights, royalties, and revenue management process. So by show of hands, who feels comfortable with their knowledge of blockchain and tokens and things like that? Oh, not too many hands. Okay, great. So I'm not going to go too deeply. I'll leave that to Michelle Munson and her team over at Alluvio, who have much, much deeper dive, if you want to, into blockchain, but I will go over sort of some basics. So blockchain is a decentralized digital ledger of transactions. So that's what everybody knows. Imagine it as a spreadsheet that is replicated thousands of times around the world on different computers. Anytime anything is written to it, it can't be changed, mostly by virtue of it being duplicated, because it wouldn't agree with the other ones in the process, but there's also hashes back and forth. Every block written to the chain is hashed, and both points forward and backward. So if there's a change to one of them somewhere in all those thousands, it wouldn't agree and immediately be fixed. Ethereum is a particular blockchain. It's also a public blockchain, but it allows for embedded code as well as simply representations of currency. That's what the Bitcoin blockchain does. And mining is the process of validating those transactions on the blockchain. So centralized versus decentralized versus distributed. Sometimes the words, especially decentralized and distributed, get mixed up a little bit, so just wanted to give quick definitions. Centralized is obvious. Decentralized means that there are decisions being made, and the resulting behavior is an aggregate. So there's no central authority at all. With distributed, you have a processing shared all across the network, but there can be a central authority. In blockchain, they call consensus protocols are the process by which nodes validate those transactions, write them to the blockchain, and make them immutable. So how does it work? You start with the request, a transaction to basically put something onto the blockchain. A peer-to-peer network does that verification process. Somebody essentially wins that race to solve the mathematical equation that says this is a valid block to be written to the chain. It's then written to the chain, and now you have that immutable object written to the chain. It could be anything, including smart contracts, which are code. So what are tokens versus currencies? So a currency is a coin that doesn't have any intrinsic function, no utility. But a token is a currency connected to a smart contract. They are self-executing lines of code. There are all different kinds of definitions, programmable stores of value, cryptocurrency with inherent value. All these things are basically saying that it has utility. You can do something with it beyond treat it as money. So smart contracts are that code, and they can, just like any other, they're essentially if-then statements. You can code them as with as much complexity or little complexity as possible. The key to a good smart contract tends to be simplicity, because the more complex they get, the more vulnerable they are to abuse. It's not really hacking, because you can't change it. You can't get into it and make a change to any of the content of the smart contract, but you can take the results of those contracts and intercept them, redirect them, things like that. So the more complicated you make it, the harder it is to track that kind of a thing. So what you want to do is avoid that and make it as simple as possible. So how does this relate to the entertainment industry? So what we're doing, and what we think that one of the use cases for blockchain is to create a supply chain directly from the artist to the consumer, cutting out the middlemen, disintermediating the process. But also creating a feedback loop so fans can interact directly with those artists. So artist, content creator, interchangeable words in this universe. And the idea being that a lot of independent artists don't have access to the type of distribution networks. There's a lot of middlemen in the process. So how do these make a splash? How do they make money? How does an independent artist do what they love, and also have a sustainable economy for themselves and not have to drive an Uber or wait tables? So that's the concept here. It's not really competing with the studios. No one's making $200 million blockbuster movies in an ecosystem like this. But it can serve very well an independent filmmaker or musician or writer. So what are the benefits? Again, that peer-to-peer value exchange. So you're really connecting a consumer or a fan with an artist. Creators own their IP. They can now monetize it themselves. They can exploit it. They can do anything they want with their IP. They're not selling it off to somebody else to exploit outside of their control once an initial contract is over. Maintain that sustainable income. Enable transparent reporting. So everybody knows that the sort of big selling point of blockchain is that transparency, because it's all written to a public ledger. Now, there are private blockchains, but we're talking about public blockchains. And so once it's there are things like, BlockScan that can actually track that information. It can be audited sort of automatically, and therefore it's very hard to hide anything from the participants in that content. And both the creator and the consumer own their own data. This is more of a crypto world, blockchain type value, is that your data is your data. So if it's generated on your content, you should have access to it. If it's as a consumer, your private data should remain it unless you want to share it for some reason. If you don't want to share your demographic data, you don't have to. If you want to, because there's some incentive in the process to do that, then that's where it becomes shareable, but it's your choice. It's not the kind of thing that's handled as a requirement of doing anything within the environment. And again, that connection between the creator and the audience on a personal level. So what I'm really here to talk about is how does this thing work for rights and revenue and royalty management, right? So tokens have those smart contracts. They enable us to program activity and behavior. So how might we apply that to rights? So in this case, I'm going to talk about content tokens. And so a token can represent an asset in the digital world. In this case, what we're doing is we're saying, okay, so there's an artist who has a product. They mint some tokens for it. Some smart contracts are created that are written into the blockchain, the Ethereum blockchain. But then they distribute those tokens to 3 other participants as well as themselves in the process. So each of these participants owns 25% of those tokens, and therefore 25% of the content, or the revenue for the content, the rights to the content. So now we have a consumer. A consumer buys a piece of content. It could be any of these things or other things. This is just what we're working with in our ecosystem. They can pay dollars, or in our case, Ether. Ether is the coin of the Ethereum blockchain. All of it is sent into Ether. Goes through a smart contract, and then is pushed to those tokens. So because it's pushed to those tokens, and each of these participants owns 25% of those tokens, they now own immediately 25% of that Ether. So yes, it's been transformed into a cryptocurrency. There's volatility in that market. You have to be careful that you don't pull that money out quickly if you want to make sure that there's no volatility, or you can ride it, speculate it any way you want to. But the bottom line is that there's no audit in this process. There's no accounting in this process. The money is driven directly to the artists or the participants' wallets. Another way of doing this is to think about tokenizing yourself. So you create a token that represents you. Same smart contracts, but now all the tokens are held by you. Now imagine that an artist creates 3 songs, but they co-write those songs. So they're responsible for 50% of each song, and then with 3 other people who also own 50% of the song. What you can do is you can assign 50% of that revenue to the original artist token, and then 50% of each of those songs to the other participants, the songwriters or musicians or whoever they are, who actually have rights to that music. And then very similarly, as we sort of described in the last case, when revenue is generated by that song, it goes to Ether, the smart contract sends 50% of that Ether to the original artist and 50% to the other participant. Obviously, if you pay directly in Ether, which you can do, then same thing happens. It just skips the step of converting the dollars to Ether. So before I talk about us, what's the real power of this now is managing those rights. So now there's no contracts involved. If one of those participants decide, okay, I want to give my rights to that song to my friend, they just reassign tokens, or they reassign the value. They don't have to go through a contract process. There's no paper that determines who owns what. It's all based on who holds those tokens. So now rights are very manageable, and any combination of these 2 models works. It's not restricted to one. Not only that, but also you can create multi-dimensional arrays that trigger different participation models, different tokens, revenue driven to different tokens, depending on time or revenue goals or whatever you want to do. So you have 2 forms of managing the revenue that comes out of these via the blockchain. One is via reassigning revenue to different tokens over time or over whatever model you want to do, or you can do it by simply shifting tokens around. So I can give my content tokens for a title to my son, and now he's getting revenue, and a little revenue stream while he's at college and has some spending money. And he can give them back to me if we want to, or I can give them to anybody I want. But that giving of the tokens is what represents the value. So you're no longer dealing in contracts, in legal fees, in that whole process. And you've still disintermediated the process because the money goes directly from the consumer to the artist or to the participants. So Breaker, our product, is a little bit of a suite of applications that we put together. Token is that application that allows you to create those tokens. You can tokenize yourself, you can tokenize a product, you can create as many or as few tokens as you want. You can literally create one, and that's your token, or you can create millions, and you can actually try to sell them and raise money. We're not really part of that process right now. The regulations don't really permit it in the United States. Outside the United States, you can do that kind of a thing in certain countries, but in the meantime, really this is that tool for creating your revenue tokens. Rentalist is a tool set we have out there that allows you, it's really just a marketplace that allows you to rent and buy equipment, hire people, whatever, just make your content. Artist Portal is a content management system that allows you to manage your content, get it ready for publication, and assign those tokens. So that now that's where that whole process goes in, where that multidimensional array is set up, so that now you know how it's going to happen with that revenue over time. Our Breaker is our app. It went out in beta a few weeks ago. It's actually now working. This whole process does function. Anytime there's a transaction, that money is being pushed directly to the rights holders. And then a digital wallet ties this all together, allows you to authenticate yourself anywhere within this ecosystem. So that's it. Quick rundown of tokens and rights management via the blockchain. I'm sure there are questions. Hopefully you have some for me. There is a platform fee, but really we actually are developing this system to be self-sustaining using our token called singles as the sort of gas and the way it works within the system and how all that sort of happens and gets paid. We actually have our own production company, and so we don't see this as our sort of primary revenue driver for the company. There's a platform fee essentially to keep the wheel spinning, but it's not really intended as that process. We intend to make money the way the other artists in the ecosystem make money by creating content and then selling it through the process.
Hi, Adam. It's Jim Hellman from Movie Labs.
Hi.
I'm wondering, when you have these transactions on a public blockchain, where you have wallet identifiers or token identifiers that are sort of pseudonymous. I mean, they're not completely anonymous, they're not completely identifying. How do you believe that the current implementation satisfies things like GDPR and the Video Privacy Protection Act?
Yes, because your identity is not written to the blockchain, like you sort of implied there. Your identity is separate, and in the current implementation, we keep that separately in our own database for users and only represent them as the tokens that represent the content, not the person. So wallet addresses, tokens are represented on the public blockchain. We keep it separate. What our goal is, I'm sure some of you have heard that there's this sort of concept called self-sovereign identity, and that's what I was talking about a little earlier on in the presentation, where you get to keep your data. And that's being developed in very interesting ways to sort of create a reputation that's sovereign to yourself on the blockchain that can be used for contracts, for transactions, that kind of thing, without ever really identifying you or exposing your private data to the world. So yeah, I think it's very secure. It's all hashed.
Subject to de-anonymization in the same way that IP addresses are? That, if, say, there's a public list that says this IP address consumed all these movies, and then that IP address, I go to some store and I buy something, now they have my IP address and they have my identity, so now all of a sudden I've disclosed to them, my movie collection. I think the same thing would apply here if you were to sell tokens and...
Yeah, obviously there are probably ways. Figuring out someone's wallet address isn't the easiest thing in the world, but you can determine that this wallet address has these movies or has made these transactions via the Breaker app. So if someone could figure out that that wallet address was you, then yes, it is public. That is kind of part of the point.
Over here, yeah. Hi, Pat Griffiths. So we heard recently of the fellow who died with $145 million of Bitcoin, which I think gives many of us pause for concern. Simple things like, okay, I have these rights, and maybe it's something I want to pass on as an inheritance to my kids, but I die. Who's going to know? How am I going to keep that in my archive somewhere? But what do you do to prevent those kind of situations?
So there are, it's very similar to passwords for anything. There are hardware wallets now where you can actually put it on basically a USB drive that's been designed specifically to hold a crypto wallet. You can make a copy of your wallet. You can put it in a safety deposit box. When someone plugs that in and knows, they have to know your password to that, but once they know that, it updates automatically, so even if there's been time that's passed and things that have happened in the meantime, because of the blockchain and all that information that's out there publicly, it will update automatically and then be up to date. So it's passwords are still a thing, right? So until we get past that point, which we know we're headed toward one way or another, it's something that you have to keep in mind. But there are ways of backing up wallets. And there are safe ways that like I said. Is my time? Not yet. Oh, we have someone.
Thank you. I guess I'm missing something, and this is probably because I'm a complete neophyte in this area, but if you, as Breaker, maintain a database that connects me to my tokens, haven't you in effect created a central authority?
We don't maintain a database that connects you to your tokens. Your tokens live in your crypto wallet that's used to authenticate to Breaker. What we do is we separate your identity from any transaction on the blockchain. And that is centralized. At this point it is. Until something like a self-sovereign thing, there's one called Uport, there's one called Sovereign actually. So there's a few projects out there on the blockchain to create that. They haven't quite hit maturity yet. When they do, we will be switching over immediately because it is very much a part of our values. In the meantime, we have a central user database, but any transaction does not connect your identity within our database to the transaction that gets written to the blockchain.
No, I understand that. It was the, but I think what you've explained now sorts out what I was puzzled about. Thank you.
Right, sure. Happy to chat afterward. Thank you very much. And have a great rest of the show, whatever is left of it.